season meeting started here. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We'll use the chat to post your questions. We'll try to address any questions that are on YouTube as well at the end. The number one thing I want us to keep in mind as our guiding principle through this meeting, it is not a normal season. We will allow student athletes the opportunity to compete, and that is going to be priority number one. Again, this is not going to look normal, but we're going to do everything we can to resemble normalcy and keep our kids as the priority one and that opportunity to compete. A little bit of a timeline. We've had a few questions on kind of how we've ended up where we are. November 2nd, the variance was requested for 7 duals and 7 tournaments with a 16-man regional and 8-man state. Took basically a month. The variance is returned. Duals only, 10 maximum duals, no postseason was granted at that time. 12/15, the variance was requested, allowing a dual format in tries and quads. 12/21, that came back, being allowed to have the tries and quads would put our max number of duals up to 20 matches and 20 duals. So it kind of gives you an idea. We originally started with a 30% reduction. That was not granted for a myriad of reasons that our CDPHEs to own, not ours. But we ended up with the 10 duals. We went back and fought for our tries and quads. What you will see on here is postseason is not listed. That is still a work in progress. We haven't gotten a green light yet for our regionals and championships, but we haven't gotten a red light either. So we continue to work and are patient and truly believe that in the coming days, we'll be given that green light for our regionals and championships. So your season calendar for the 21 wrestling season, January 18th, first day of practice. January 25th is your first allowable contest. 2/26 is your last allowable contest as we prepare for regionals. Again, this could be subject to change based on what we get from CDPHE in the state as far as that last allowable contest. If we are not allowed regionals or state, then we'll have to make adjustments to the end of our seasons and carry it through there. But this is working with the assumption that we will have regionals and state in some form or fashion. That 2/26 date would be your last allowable contest. That allows us time to get the seeding done for regionals because it will look quite different this year with the way things are going as far as having the different pieces set up for how you're going to get your duals and tries and quads and seeding those regionals. To have a last second dual the week or the day before, things like that are going to really upset how we're trying to seed a regional. So therefore, we're going to set that cutoff date at that time. You have a 20 match season limit and a 20 dual limit for the season. No more than 4 teams are allowed at a single site. Duals, tries, and quads only, no tournaments. CDPHE has asked, and you'll see this in all of our slideshows, that you build schedules that limit travel and overnight stays. Now, obviously, I'm a Western Slope guy. I know that some guys out there are going to have some overnight stays, and travel is just part of the game. But we want to be conscious of trying to limit travel and limit our overnight stays in building your regular season schedule. Forfeits in a dual will count in your 20 match limit. If you're at a try or a quad, those do count as 2 or 3 duals respectively. So going to a quad and having 3 duals that day would count as 3. It doesn't count as a single day. Lower levels have all the same limits. I'm not going to go and put a different lower amount for your JV guys. They get their 20 matches. How that looks in your actual gym, if you're going to do them prior to your varsity dual, if you're going to do it after, I'm going to leave that up to you guys and following your county guidelines and what you're at with your level orange and where you may be there, if you're allowed 50 in, those kind of things. Guys, that's an ever-changing part of where we're at right now. Our variance that we have to allow us to wrestle right now is going to be 25 in a gym. And so therefore you can figure out how to get your JV lower level guys in either prior to or after your varsity dual. So it leads me into participant numbers. Right now, the variance we have says practices are limited to 25 student athletes in a gym. 3 coaches and 1 trainer are allowed at practice and at duals. Duals are limited to 25 student athletes in the competitive gym. So roughly 12 for each team. If you are going to wrestle a full 14 weights, then you'll need to figure out a way to stagger the arrival and departure to not exceed that 25 number in the gym. Again, this is with the asterisk that there is an evolving COVID dial and these numbers could change. I know there is a state guidance out there that came out on the 4th that says if you're in level orange, you can have 50 in a gym. I'm just reading you what our variances are right now. Our variances say we can have 25, and that includes practice. However, these were all done to be in level red. Now that level orange is here, there may be some loosening of these restrictions. I don't have that information to be able to present to you yet, so therefore I'm presenting what we have approved at this time with the hope and the goal that these will be less restrictive as we move forward. CDPHE has also asked us to mention ventilation. It is crucial to trying to keep the spread from happening, avoid poorly ventilated areas. Improving ventilation is a key safety factor. Work with building engineers to promote airflow, and capacity limits have to be considered for ventilation. I know some schools have actually moved out of their traditional wrestling rooms and have their mats set up in the larger gym to be able to have their practices there to allow for better airflow. Those are some things we're talking about in this scenario for wrestling is what can you do to move to a larger space to ensure that you have more ventilation. Weights, we're using our standard weight classes. So that's the 14 for the guys, 10 for the girls. The standard 2-pound growth allowance after 1-1 is in place. So no changes. Essentially what you're going to see, guys, is we haven't made any changes to the weights or the weight system. Standard additional weight allowance for consecutive days is in place, and the standard weight dissension plan is also in place. The weight certification opened November 1st. It is still open, so you can get your guys' weight certified. They have to be certified before they can compete. So again, trying to do everything we can to keep this as quote unquote normal as possible while still allowing our kids to move forward. So again, standard weights, the standard 2-pound growth allowance after 1-1, we all have that. So for instance, your 106 is now going to be a 108. If you do have the consecutive days, you get that 1 pound there. So now you could be wrestling at a 109 would be your weight in that example. Weigh-ins, this part will be different. So your weights are the same, but the weigh-in process is going to be different. Student athletes are to weigh in with their coach prior to arrival at the site. And that prior arrival weigh-in will be the official weigh-in, which coaches will record and enter into the OPC. Once you arrive at a site, if it's a dual, tri, quad, or if it's regionals or state, if we get to that point, we'll have a random draw of 3 weight classes for weigh-in. So each competitor in that weight class will go and weigh in. If the individual at that weigh-in does not make weight, his full team or her full team now must go through the entire weigh-in process. So we're giving coaches the opportunity to weigh their kids at home. We're going to go on an honesty factor here that they're going to enter the weights properly. And then there will be a luck of the draw with a random 3 weights drawn to weigh in. If those 3 guys make weight, we move on and we don't have a large weigh-in process and we can get to wrestling pretty quickly. So this should help, A, avoid mass groups trying to do their weigh-ins. 2, should make our weigh-ins very quick because we're going to weigh in, you know, if we've got a quad going, we've got 4 kids or 4 teams, excuse me, and we've got 3 kids, 3 weight classes, we're talking 12 kids are going to weigh in and we're moving on. If one of those 12 doesn't make, then that team would have to go through and do the full weigh-in to make sure that all their information is correct as to what the coach certified that prior to arrival. Okay, masks. We got to have a little fun with this one. So we'll look at masks here and what we've got to be working with. Masks must be worn by all persons at the event. After attaching the ankle band, wrestlers may remove their mask and leave it with their coach, whether he's in the corner or on the team bench in a dual type setting for the match, and then must place the mask back on at the conclusion of the match. Masks are to be worn at practice except during one-on-one sessions during practice. So if you're doing any type of conditioning work, anything like that, your mask must be worn. This was in the CDPHE variance request that came back to us. This is how masks are going to be done for wrestling. They may be different for other sports. Other counties may be saying something different. I'm telling you what came from CDPHE to us for wrestling is this. Event management, only 2 teams in the competitive gym when they're doing their duel. Non-competing teams must have an assigned area to remain as a cohort until their time to duel. The thought process here is when they are not in the gym as a competitive team, you'll need to assign them some type of place that has ventilation that's not a small space, so not in a wrestling room, but a classroom, or if you have a locker room that is large enough for them to go in to be able to maintain their cohort of 14 to 18 people, whatever may be there, that they can be in that space. Mats and chairs must be sanitized after each duel. Again, when the next two teams come in for a duel, they should have a clean mat and clean chairs that have been sanitized after the previous duel. The team bench area should provide for social distancing. So if you've watched any of the NCAA games that have been on recently, or NBA games where you have a second row, if you can develop some type of system like that to have your team bench area for your duel set up that way, that would be the ideal situation to provide for social distancing on the team bench. Essential personnel. So in my mind, this is the group that should not count towards any type of spectator limits that you have in your gym. 3 coaches per team, 1 trainer per team. The officials, your scoreboard operator, your scorekeeper, and your tapper. Those would be the ones that will be available and listed as your essential personnel. It should not be counted towards your roster limit and or your spectator limit if you're allowed to have spectators. Officials shall conduct the coin toss and sportsmanship reminder with the head coach of each team in a socially distant manner prior to the beginning of the duel. Officials must always wear a face covering at the hosting site, including when arriving, departing, and during all other normal duties on and off the mat. While conducting matches, officials should wear a face covering that covers their mouth and nose. Officials will never touch the wrestlers and should always maintain a safe distance from the wrestlers. At the conclusion of a match, the official will instruct the winning wrestler to raise his hand, and will also raise his hand with a corresponding colored wristband. Officials must use hand sanitizer between each match, and then also disposable gloves can be worn if replaced after each match. Postseason, again, this is our perfect world where we get approval for this. Regional tournaments will be 2-day events. 112 students a day may participate. So in the boys' weight classes, it'll be the first 7 weight classes. It'll be 106 through 145. Day 2, you'll come back. It'll be 112 students, but your weight classes will be 152 through 285. Girls regionals will be the same. It'll be 5 on day 1, 5 on day 2. So 100 to 127, 136 to 215. There's a maximum of 24 student athletes on the competition floor at a time. We're going to have to figure out how to rotate through and get these guys in 24 at a time to go through our regionals. Again, this is stuff that we're hoping we can get final approval on from the CDPHE in the coming days, so we can really begin to nail down exactly the format of what our regionals will look like as far as a logistical piece with having 24 out on time. How are we going to go through and do that? We'll have to figure that out. Luckily, we've got 5.5, 6 weeks until we get close to this time frame to get the exact logistics of how that's done once they give that to us. But these are the numbers. I will tell you, CDPHE is hesitant on our large number of 112, but we are continuing to fight and show that we can have cohorts brought in, and whether it's by weights, whether it's by different things that we can do to bring in 25 at a time to be able to do that. So again, giving you the worst case scenario here on what our postseason regional event would look like. And as we get further clarification from CDPHE, we can clear up those logistics. No consolation bracket until the final 4 per weight. 2 student athletes from each boys region advance to state. 4 girls advance from the 2 regions to state on the girls' side. So again, it'll be 2 advancing. In doing so, what we've done is we've kept our numbers actually the same that we have at the regional site. We're keeping that the same to go to state, because what you've done is a 2-day regional now becomes a 1-day state. And so when we've broken up our regionals and we said you could have 16, that's because we've broken it into 16 over 2 days. To have a single day state event requires an 8-man bracket. The CHSAA State Championship will be 2 single-day events, 8-man brackets in each weight class. Wrestling mats are to be disinfected at the conclusion of each championship round. All regular season officials' mandates would remain in effect. Full consolation rounds at state championships in that 8-man bracket. With that, guys, that's the bulk of what I've got to be able to cover from a logistics side and give you a little bit clearer than the 30,000 foot view. Hopefully we dropped it down to a 20,000 foot view for you, but that is where we are at with what the state has approved for us at this time. So we can go ahead, Ryan, Casey, if you can help me here, we can go ahead and start addressing some of our questions.
Yep.
on these, if we get repetitive over and over again on the same questions, if we keep hammering the 2 guys versus 4 guys out of regionals, guys, it is what it is at this point. So we'll answer the questions we need to. And then, so the first one I can see on here is actually the bulletin. So the bulletin is ready. I'm just waiting to put in postseason information. The bulletin doesn't do us a ton of good if we don't have our postseason information. So if we get to the end of the week and still don't have final approvals for regionals and state championships, we'll go ahead and upload those bulletins, with the postseason being a large TBD at that time.
Another question, Adam, we have is, can you just go into further detail about the 20 match limit, or just walk through that again?
Yeah, so you're allowed 20 duels total. So you've got a 5-week regular season at this time, with the assumption that we have a regional week and a championship week. And so with that, with the quads being allowed, we're saying you can have 4 matches per week, essentially, is where that math is coming from. So you're allowed 20 total duels, 20 total matches. Some of you may be able to go through and figure out exactly how that would work, and may look different. Tries versus quads and things like that, or exhibition matches, things like that. We're at 20 duels and 20 matches is what our limits are for this wrestling regular season.
There was some confusion between a date of February 26th or February 27th. Can you clarify that?
Did I not? It'd be the 27th if that's that Saturday. Let me look. Is that the Saturday? So the 27th. So I'll go back and correct that slide. The 27th is the Saturday. So that would be the final day of the regular season, is Saturday 27th. So I'll correct that slide before it's emailed out to everyone.
Does the 25 athlete limit include coaches, officials, other essential workers, and fans? And then on top of that, can you talk about what essential workers mean? There's some questions about that. Like, is PA an essential worker?
So in our list, PA was not considered as an essential, because your PA announcer could also, in the tournaments I've run, your PA announcer can also be the person that's running your score. So they can both run a microphone and to announce who's on the mat. So they were not listed as a separate essential worker on that piece. So essential workers are just those that are going to be there to work the event, that would not count towards your capacity limits and or towards your roster limits.
And then just some questions, if you can email the PowerPoint out after the meeting.
Yep, we'll definitely get that done.
Can you talk about school without a program, with some counties canceling wrestling season, how that's going to play out, and just explain state law there?
Yeah, so what we've got, we actually talked last night. We're going to put together kind of an information sheet to send out to ADs on exactly how the system would work if you've got some newly found members of your team, based on circumstances around what county they may reside in. So what the state statute says is you can reserve up to 50% of your roster space for your own individual kids. And so you don't have to go through and have every single person that's coming from another school come and take over your roster. You can still reserve those spots. So we'll put that in a form that can come out to you guys hopefully by the end of the week, and we'll copy that state statute in there also, so that you can have that information to be able to share with kids that are coming, and also parents that are at your school currently, so they know exactly how this process works when you do have out-of-building students showing up to your building.
Is there a 30-minute air time after cleaning and disinfecting?
That would depend on what type of disinfectant you're using and what the manufacturer recommends for their specific sanitation device. So you also want to make sure that the mat obviously is completely dry. So whatever solution you're using, just follow manufacturer's guidelines there. We're not going to set something that says it has to be 30 minutes, 31 minutes, 50 minutes. We're not going to set a timeline. It needs to be for what is actually listed as the proper protocol per that device you're using.
Can we get a couple of pounds for the random weigh-in?
Not sure what that means.
Ron, if you want to just clarify that in the chat. Have you been in contact with USA Wrestling, as they have been very efficient at tournament this COVID season?
Yes, we have talked with them. A lot of their stuff has been on the tournament side, and we're not allowed tournaments, but we have talked with them on some of our protocols, including the weigh-in process that we've got that was in consultation with them as well. So I have spoken with them, and as we get new information on variances, that one of the groups that we reach out to speak with them and see how we can solidify things on what they've experienced. We also have some data from them that we've shared with CDPHE on tournaments that they've run. We're relying on their data to hopefully push through our regional and state tournaments based on some large scale events that they've been able to accomplish across the country.
For quads, can we not have 2 mats in the gym, or could we run 2 different gyms?
So the verbiage that I'm going to tell you is that you're allowed to have 25 in a gym. So if you have 2 gyms, I would say you could have 25 in each gym. The verbiage that we've got has 25 per gym. It doesn't say 25 per high school. So that would be, if I were an AD, that would be how I was operating. If I had the officials and I could carry that capacity, I believe you could have 2 duels going at a time, 25 in each gym.
Can we only wrestle 4 matches a week?
There's nothing in the variance that says it's a per week thing. So if you need to get 5, or if you want to go to a tournament out of state, there's no rule that says you can't go to a tournament out of state. But if you get your 5 matches in at that tournament, those are going to count towards your 20 matches total for that individual. So no, it is not a 4 match limit for a week. So if you need to have a try and a quad that week, so you end up with 5, that would be allowable. That the 4 per week is what we use to create our maximum, assuming you could get a single dual plus a quad in each week to come up with 4 per week.
Some of these questions you've already answered, so I'll just find one here that you haven't addressed. Do you have is there any plan in terms of school counties that have canceled? Is there another plan to have a season for those schools if their county is canceled? At
this time, no, there's not.
What about coaches for school without a program?
They would need to be, so if you're to coach at a school without a program, you'd have to go through the hiring protocols at one of the schools that does offer a program if you were going to be a coach this season, because you would not be affiliated with a school at that time.
How are teams supposed to set duels for girls wrestling when programs only have a single girl or very few athletes? Is there any way they can wrestle with boys and then compete at girls regionals?
Unfortunately, we're up against state statute in that girls wrestling is brought on as a sanctioned sport. So there is a clear distinction between the 2 sports. And so girls teams are going to have to wrestle girls teams and boys wrestle boys teams. I'm hopeful that we can get some more information to you in the coming days with a couple of thought processes on how to work with scheduling on the girls side, as well as some of our smaller schools that have small rosters. I'm keenly aware that if you're at a small school, a duel with having 4 or 5 guys on your roster or 2, 3, 4 girls on your roster is going to be extremely difficult. So I acknowledge that fact. Unfortunately, this is the hand we've been dealt, and so we've got to figure out how to accommodate that. We do have the dual meet events, which may be able to accomplish some of those things, but we have a couple other small pieces we're working on that I'm hoping come to fruition in the next 24 to 48 hours that hopefully can provide some scheduling relief to a certain extent. I'm not at liberty at this point to be able to say exactly what those are, but if we're able to get those things pushed through, I will make sure to get that communication out quickly so that it can hopefully assist in the scheduling piece.
Is there a minimum number of matches required to be eligible for the postseason?
No, because you're going to show up to regional. We're going to see those guys that are coming into regional or girls that are coming to regional. So that would be, they can show up and we're going to get their record in there. Again, if they've got their forfeits, things like that, we'll get them seated so they can jump in.
If schools weigh in prior to leaving school and they travel to host school, are those kids allowed to eat or drink anything until they find out if a random weight class draw?
No, just like if you're coming into a traditional setting, if you're going to weigh in prior to the actual event, this would be no different. You wouldn't be eating or drinking riding to the event because you got to weigh in when you get there. We're just going to do the weigh-in before we get on the bus as opposed to doing the weigh-in when we get off the bus.
Are there any guidelines in regards to disinfectant?
I'll be honest with you, not that I have seen. Nothing's been handed to me on what exactly disinfectant needs to be used. If we need to dive deeper into that and go provide an exact an exact description of what chemicals need to be in there, we can dive into that and search that out. But at this time, no, we've not gone through and put out a prescribed version of a disinfectant.
Is there a practice limit required before competition?
Yes, you must have 3. So you must have you've got to have 3, but we're actually having you have a full week of practices. But the standard 3 days of practice does apply. So you can actually get 6 practices in if you host a practice on the Saturday. You must have 3 before you can compete.
If weigh-ins are 1 hour before matches, how can a team traveling further than an hour weigh in? Can a home site provide the weigh-in spot for visiting teams?
Yes, so that is one of the concessions we'll need to make depending on who is showing up to your events. If you are, again, I'll use my West Slope example. If you're having to travel a long distance or even stay overnight at a place before your duel or your quad, whatever it may be, I would provide, if I were the host, I would find a way to provide a place for those 14 kids to have their weigh in there. And it can just be with their coach still, so we don't have to have any large group there. They can still do their weigh in with their coach to have their official weigh in there, and then the 3 weights would still be drawn as the random draw once all teams are there.
If a local variance allows for 50 in the gym, can we follow the local variance?
So competition, our variance says that we can have 25 in a competitive gym for competition. For practice, if you have one that says that you can have 50 in there for practice, I'm not going to stand in the way and tell you can't, but I can tell you for competition, we've been told we can have 25 at this time. So that's the number we're going to stick with until we are told otherwise.
Can you go back real quick to the 4 matches per week? Can you just clarify that again? There's quite a few questions asking for clarification.
So there is no limit per week on how many matches you can have. If you can figure out how to schedule, if you wanted to have 2 quads in a week and get 6 matches in 1 week, that's up to you. You're using, a little less than a third of your season in 1 week. If that's something that you need to do for scheduling purposes to be able to find those matches, I'm not going to stand in the way of you doing that.
What is the roster limit?
So your roster limit would be 25 is what you're allowed in a gym. So you can have as many as you want on a roster. You're only going to be allowed to have 25 in a gym. So our standards right now that we were given say that you can have 25 at practice. Again, everything we have written was for level red. We're in level orange, which I know says you can have 50 in a gym. So that was going to be up to you and your local county health department and how many can be in a gym. So there is no set roster limit, but when you go to an actual duel, you're allowed to have 25 in the competitive gym, so there'll be 12 per team. So if you're going to wrestle the full 14 weights, you'll need to figure out how to usher in and usher out those extra 2 guys or girls to be able to get your 14 or 10 weights. Girls won't be a problem with the 10 weights, but for your guys, if you're wrestling the full 14, you'll have to usher in those 2 and usher out the first 2 or however you choose to do that. But you'll be able to maintain your 25 number that way.
Can we schedule more than 20 duels if our athletes stay within 20 matches?
No, our teams must be at 20 duels. That's the maximum amount our teams can have.
If a school only has 2 female wrestlers and another school has 3 at different weights and they wrestle at one site, does that count as 2 duels or 1?
So if one team has 2, the other team has 3, and we're going to wrestle at the same site, that would just be that's a single duel, right?
I think so, yeah.
I think I saw that was Paul. If I'm not answering that right, let me know or call me or whatever. But it just seems like you've got one kid that's going to get a forfeit and move on and get the win via forfeit, and the other 2 are going to wrestle. So that'd be 1 duel. Oh, 3 teams at one site. I see that there. So 3 teams at one site. So that would technically be a try. So that would count as 2 duels.
Similar to football, you did with football, you're going to publish a spreadsheet of people looking for matches on certain dates.
So we have that out there now. If you need duels, that spreadsheet's out there and we can resend that. It is set up the same way as football. So it has it by week. So if you need a duel on week 2, it's there. You can also put an X as to what weights you have. So rather than calling somebody that you have all 14 weights and you're going to call somebody that says they need a duel and they have 3 wrestlers, we're probably not going to ever set that duel up. So let's go ahead and list what weights I have so we can find like schools to try to wrestle against, or we can see we have a different number, but our wrestlers are one weight class off, and we can figure out how to wrestle up and some things like that. We'll leave that up to you guys. But yes, those spreadsheets do exist for guys and girls, and we can resend that link if we need to.
What is the seeding criteria for regionals?
So this is something that's still a little bit TBD. Once we know exactly what our regionals are going to look like, we are going to be using our friends at Track Wrestling are going to help with this. So it'll be this year's record, but it'll also take into account what you've done previously. So if you are a state placer, if you are a regional placer, all those things that we've used in the past will be there to go through and help set this up. We don't have to get together as coaches the day of and do that. We can take all that information, and Track Wrestling can build all of our brackets for us and seed it appropriately that way.
Are you planning on realigning regionals based on schools not participating?
Yes. Well, I guess I'll rephrase that. I'm going to meet with our wrestling committee this afternoon or tomorrow morning. We're going to discuss that. My assumption is yes, we will redraw. It really looks like 4A is where our issue is going to be currently with where our teams are. If we have more changes, we can adjust accordingly. But right now, it appears that 4A is one of the regions in 4A has been the most impacted, where I believe it was 7 out of the 15 teams in one region are not going to be wrestling. So we will need to do some work on 4A. But I will address that with our wrestling committee and meet with them and come up with a solution there with that group and then present that out.
If a wrestler from a school without a program goes to another school and then the original school does allow wrestling, that's a later date, does the wrestler have to return to their home school?
Yes, they must go back because they're no longer a student at a school without a program. Their school now has a program, so they would go back to their original school.
Can you clarify how you define one-on-one practice?
You ask good questions. Anytime you're going to have any type of sparring, anytime that there's going to be close interaction one-on-one, or there's something where wearing a mask is not deemed safe because of it coming over your eyes, a choking hazard, any of those type situations, that's where the mask would not be required. If we're doing conditioning or anything like that, where there's not a safety hazard, then the mask should be on.
Should the mat be disinfected between matches or just between duels?
So between duels only is what we've asked for. So we're going to say that it is between duels, you'll then disinfect. Between matches, none of us want to be at a gym for 48 hours straight to disinfect a mat after each match. So we're going to do it between duels.
This is like another question on school without a program, but it sounds like, can you just clarify, if wrestlers do have the opportunity to have a season if their school does not have a program, is that correct?
If your school doesn't have a program, you're going to follow state statutes. You're going to go to district of residence, district of attendance. Odds are the school that you're at, if it's a county-based decision, those two aren't going to apply. So now you can go to a school that shares a contiguous border with your school district and go there as a student without a program.
Can you clarify that is each individual wrestler only allowed 20 matches in 5 weeks? Or is it a team scheduling component?
Teams can have 20 duels. Wrestlers can have 20 matches.
Let's see here. Are you currently asking for variances in level orange to meet for counties in level orange to meet it at 50?
So where we're at right now is because all that information has come out just in the last couple of days. We don't have a lot of information on level orange yet. I'm presenting to you what was asked for in level red. We will go back and see if we can follow the variances that are allowed at level orange and see if we can adjust accordingly. My hope and my assumption is that we will be able to adjust those numbers. Right now, what I can present to you is what we've been approved at, and that's the 25.
Spectators, does that need to follow local variance?
Yep, that'll be up to local control, just like it has been with all of our other sports. We're not going to tell you who can or can't come in the gym. Good luck deciding what mom gets to walk in and what mom can't. Have fun with that.
Just to clarify, a school cannot have more than 4 teams out of site, even if they stay within no more than 3 duels per school.
Four teams in a gym. So if you're using more than one gym, you're going to have 4 teams in a gym. If you are, here's what I would tell you guys. If you're going to use that type of setup, those 4 are going to be their own individual type of cohort. So they're only going to wrestle those 4. So we're not going to take what this turns into is going to have some type of little mini dual tournament by having 8 teams there. And that's not what we're doing. You're going to stay with those 4, and they're going to have the contacts with those 4 schools. And you're going to have a completely separate quad going on that has its own entrance and exit. And that's its own individual facility. So you're treating your two gyms as two different facilities that are hosting two separate quads.
Is it 4 teams or 4 schools? Because asking specifically about varsity and JV.
4 teams.
Thank you. Um,
And guys, the reason I would tell you that is as a team, if I went to schools, that would eliminate a lot of our co-ops. Because if I'm a co-op, I'm technically 2 schools showing up to a quad. Now I've got 5 teams, and so, now I've got 5 schools. So if we say 4 schools, that eliminates anybody that's doing a co-op from ever going to a quad. They can only go to a tri. So we're going to say it's 4 teams at a quad.
If a host school is not wrestling varsity and JV varsity and JV for a particular quad, can the attending school send their JV to a JV specific quad, even if that puts your school over the 20 limit? I think it's asking if you can schedule separately for varsity and JV.
Yeah, so your lower levels are allowed their full set of 20, however you accomplish those. If you want to host 4 different Saturdays at your place where you're going to have JV only quads those 4 days, you're allowed to do that. Your JV team is allowed to have their 20 quads. If you have a third level wrestling, you want them to have 20 quads. 20 duels, not quads. If you want to have 20 duels for those guys, you can set that up appropriately.
Can you address the forfeit rule and match limits?
So forfeits will count towards your record. So if you've got, you're allowed 20 total. So if your forfeits, they're gonna be counted towards that. So unfortunately, where I see the negative in that is going to be for seeding for regionals. We could have somebody that just didn't wrestle very many times, but picked up the forfeits along the way just because of the hand we've been dealt on duels. That's where I'm hopeful that we can get some information for our smaller schools on how to go through and get some ease of scheduling to actually get those kids matches. Because unfortunately, I do see a scenario where you could have a student athlete show up to regionals that hasn't wrestled a single match all year because it's been duels and they didn't have anybody in their weight. So let's say you're a heavyweight at a small school. You may not see anybody all year. You're technically going to go show up to regionals as 20-0 if your team was able to get 20 actual duels, and you could go 0-1 at regionals and you've wrestled 1 match for your season. So we do need to continue working on how can we do these dual meet events and things like that to get our kids matches.
Hey, Adam, this is Lyle Wright. Can I ask a question real quick?
Go for it.
You said practices are up to the county. Is that what you said? Capacity limit?
From what we're seeing is the counties have been given a variance for 50 at a practice. What I'm telling you is my variance says 25 at a competition. If your county says you can have 50 at a practice, great. Their science is better than mine.
I just see a problem with that because unless I'm totally wrong, didn't Bert say in the basketball meeting that for practice you can only have 25 basketball players?
Correct. We also have had information come out from CDPHE since then. That's where we're adjusting kind of on the fly because we're seeing that they put out variances, or not even variances. They put out levels for orange that say you can have 50. So their numbers are different than what we were given originally. Our numbers were given in red. And so I know, so that's why I'm saying for competitions, we're allowed to compete at 25. But then we're seeing that
I just see a problem when I got 25 basketball players on my court for practice, and my coach is looking up into my wrestling room, and I got 45 wrestlers up there. So, are you saying basketball might not be 25 as well?
Yes, you are on the right track there. We need to vet that out with CDPHE, and if we can actually have the 50 at practice, because that is that is the guidance that is out there right now. Is that if you're in orange, you can have 50. So since that's really just come to light in the last. Really to our attention in the last 18 hours or so, we're still vetting through that and working through that on exactly what to provide to you. What I can tell you is we have 25 right now, but I know our orange says 50. Most of us are in orange. Hopefully we have an exact number and clarity on that in the coming hours.
Thank you.
Adam, can you address crossover varsity and junior varsity athletes with regard to the 20 match limit?
They're still going to have 20 total. An individual cannot have more than 20.
What about pre-meet protocols? Any changes to warm-ups, and are masks required?
So in your warm-ups, yes, because unless you are involved in a one-on-one type of warm-up, when you're jogging around the gym doing those type of things, yes, your mask must be on during that time.
If COVID levels change, is there a chance that the regionals could change to allow for top 4 to advance to state?
I think we'd have to get into some pretty severe changes. There is a giant reluctance on the part of CDPHE to allow those numbers of 112. And so what we've established is a way to keep that magic number of 112 for those days. I'm not going to be one. I saw that from Carol. Carol, I'm not going to be one to say never, but I'm not going to hang my hat on there being any major changes there.
What about officials? How does availability of officials look?
I'll tell you that when we had just the 10 duels, it didn't look real great. Going to tries and quads, it has become much better because we're able to knock out a lot more of our dates that way. So the officials that I've talked to, and I know there's a couple on here and a couple that are watching, it is looking better and better the more that we're able to get these quads and tries together as opposed to just having the individual duels scattered throughout the state.
Is delaying the entire season on the table if a majority of highly populated Front Range counties follow Boulder County?
No, at this time it is not. We have an approved calendar, and that's what we're going with.
What options are on the table if individual, regional, and state does not get allowed by CDPHE?
Yeah, right now I would say that's a TBD. What we'll have to do is reinvent the wheel. If we want to have a culminating event, if those are not allowed, we'll need to figure out how would a dual meet championship work and how would we go through and rank teams. And guys, we need to keep our fingers crossed that we're able to get these regionals and state in, because that's going to be reinventing the wheel completely for our state and how we would do any type of culminating event if it was a true dual state championship event. There are states that do it, certainly, but there's also a limited amount of data that we would have with just having the 20 matches in. So we've begun the work on what that would look like. I've talked to the other states. I've got the information. So we're kind of working on that in the background, but that would be far down the line of options that we want to pursue at this time.
Do athletes who change programs without a school, do they count towards team points at regional and state?
Yes, they're part of your team, because if they show up with you at regionals, they are on your team because they don't have a team to be on. So they are part of your team officially for that year. If at any point their school opens their program back up, they're no longer on your team. They're on their original high school team.
Okay. I think you've answered pretty much all the other questions that I'm seeing right now.
Okay. Well, I guess for that, guys.
Here's one. If one's outside, do you need to follow? If there's an outside meet, do protocols need to be followed?
I think on that one, I would probably defer back to our level orange dial that says 50. And the reason I would say that is I feel comfortable that it's outdoors, and that's the number we were allowed for football was 50. So I think you could do some changes there. It would still be a dual only. You wouldn't be able to go and jump into a tournament. One of the hesitations on the CDPHE's part was the number of school communities gathering together. So if we had a large tournament with 16 to 20 teams there and an outbreak happens, we've now got 16 to 20 high school communities that are now impacted. So that is one of the main reasons for the dual/quad concept, was to limit the number of teams that are exposed should an outbreak occur. And so even if we were to move outside, our numbers, while you may be able to have larger numbers there at the actual facility, you would still be limited to your 4 schools for a quad.
Can you address skin checks and protocols for that?
Just put your mask on and have your coach do it like normal. The officials this year, are not going to be doing your weigh-ins. I mean, that was before we even adjusted how we're going to do weigh-ins, but the officials were not going to do that. And so it'll be up to your coach to go through and do that and have a qualified individual there to do your skin checks. If it is covered completely by their wrestling suit, then it's not something that will matter, but you'll need to have somebody there at your weigh-ins that can certify that they're all good, which in theory should be your coach. And then when you get to the actual event, at that time, I believe that's where your official will be able to come in and say, yes, this suffices, or no, it doesn't.
Can you address the difference between a 2-day regional state tournament and a 2-day regional tournament and a 2-day state tournament?
So the 2-day state tournament is actually just 2 one-day tournaments. And so you would look at Friday would be 2A and 3A, and then Saturday would be 4A, 5A, and girls. And so it's a one-day tournament, but it's 2 separate one-day tournaments, whereas your regional is a 2-day tournament because we've taken your one region and done half the weights on Friday, half the weights on Saturday.
So they're just asking why not a 2-day state tournament. I guess the answer would be because it'd actually be a 4-day state tournament in that case.
Right. Now we're going to start talking about having to wrestle Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Facilities, as well as missing that much school. We've got some logistics there that are hard to overcome.
Do all kids from the school without a program have to go to the same new program, or can they all go to different programs?
They can go to different programs. Again, it goes back to district of residence, district of attendance, and then contiguous district.
All right, that's it.
Okay. Guys, I appreciate you being on here. I know we don't have the answer to every single question yet, and things are evolving from just when I was building a PowerPoint last night to where we are today. More things have changed from just last night. I guess the good and the bad of it is that is the world we live in right now. As changes come, hopefully they're to the positive, and we will share those out with you. This PowerPoint, I'm going to go change the date from the 26th to the 27th. I will get that out to you, as well as the links to the Google Docs for finding your duals or quads. Hopefully that can be of assistance there. And again, if we get any more information on how to go through and have some scheduling ease for your small number teams, as soon as I get any type of approval on that, I will get that out to you ASAP.